Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, there's an idiom in English which says that you are in hot water if you are in trouble. So, for example, if you get arrested by the police, your friends might say, "Oh, did you hear about John? He's really in hot water this time." Or if you have a meeting with the boss and you think you might be in trouble, your colleagues might say, I think you're in hot water. Some people talk about landing in hot water. Oh, I'm not going to do that because it will land myself in hot water. Or I will land myself in hot water if I do that. Landing yourself in hot water is quite an easy thing to do. And right now, I think the BBC have landed themselves in hot water. Let me explain. So there's a really famous footballer called Gary Lineker, and he's the BBC's highest paid presenter. He does all of the sports commentaries, as you can imagine. But he objected to one of our government's new policies about immigration. He sent a tweet on Twitter comparing the government to 1930s Germany. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that. First of all, it's very offensive here to talk about the Second World War or to mention things like that in our culture anyway. And secondly, because the BBC have to be impartial. Some people think that the BBC, because it is our national broadcaster, has to always be a mouthpiece for the government. But actually, the BBC isn't controlled by the government and hasn't been for many, many years. The BBC is an establishment which keeps itself very separate from politics and does not allow itself to favour any particular position when reporting news. So because Gary Lineker said that, and it was, of course, a kind of a bad thing, the BBC reacted by removing him from his program. But people are wondering, well, are the BBC being impartial? Because they've removed someone who made a statement the BBC doesn't agree with, so they removed him. Well, I would say maybe both of them are at fault. Gary Lineker shouldn't have tweeted that thing because it's breaching his employment contract or whatever contract he has with the BBC. And then the BBC shouldn't have reacted by firing him because it makes them look as if they disagree with his statement. So Gary Lineker and the BBC have both landed themselves in hot water. It's very easy to land yourself in hot water, especially if you work in the media and you say the wrong thing. Anyway, now the government have become involved, and our Prime Minister has made a comment about it, saying that this is something the BBC has to sort out. It has nothing to do with the government. And he is right, because the BBC and the government are not connected. But there is a separate scandal involving the chairman of the BBC, who apparently was involved in getting Boris Johnson a loan. And in exchange, some people think that's how he got the job at the BBC. Because even though they're not formally connected, it's kind of connected in the sense that all of these very rich people around London all would know each other. But nobody really knows. So there's a few scandals at the BBC. The managing director of the BBC, Tim Davie, he's in hot water also because he's refusing to resign over this issue. So it's all happening at the BBC today. So keep your eye on the news because things are slowly getting worse. A lot of presenters at the BBC yesterday refused to come to work in support of Gary Lineker. And some people are saying now, well, is this the end of the BBC? It's something Boris Johnson was looking at before he left power. He referred to the BBC as the Brexit bashing corporation because he thought they were being impartial with Brexit. My feeling is that the BBC just hate everyone. But if you want me to make a prediction, I think probably everything will have changed in the next 10 years. They have an agreement with the government to broadcast, of course, and that comes up for renewal again in 2027. So whether they will survive that or whether they will have to remodel, nobody really knows. One thing is for sure, the BBC archive is wonderful. It has loads of radio and TV from the old days, going back to 1923. And it also has many other wonderful things in it. And it does many wonderful things too. But some people see it as a kind of a dinosaur. It's something from our past which hasn't really moved on. And I don't think there's an entity like it in the world. It still has some really weird practices which go way back to its foundations. And it's been very hard for it to kind of move forward in the way that a modern TV company would. So, will they dismantle the BBC, or will it just finally accept advertisements and become another style? Or maybe our whole media is going to become a bit like America, where you have one TV channel which supports conservatives, one which supports Labour, one which is radical. So that's already beginning to kind of appear with some of our news minority channels, which are a little bit frightening if you hear what they say. Anyway, very interesting, very interesting. So the BBC is in hot water, and so is Gary Lineker, the footballer. So let's see what happens with that. That's it from me for today. Hope you've enjoyed this. See you all. Bye.